Hi guys, so the reason why we're making this video is, and we talked a little bit about this in class, is that interest and annual percentage rate and compound interest, it gets very, very complicated. So we wanted to give you kind of a heads up into what we're learning, and maybe hopefully a lot of you will get it even before class. So first of all, just as a reminder, I wanted to start with a reminder of what you should have learned in the last class. So first of all, we learned in the last class that having an APR, and remember APR stands for annual percentage rate, okay? It means that this is every year, this is the rate that you have. Is not, if you have a 12% annual percentage rate, a lot of people think that if you just have 1% a month and there's 12 months, it would be the same thing. And what you learned is it's not the same thing. And just to kind of, go through why is, if you spend, let's say you put $200 in the bank, that's the, as Mr. Engoron likes to say, that's the OG amount, the original amount. And let's say that your annual percentage rate is 12%. So that would be 1 plus 0.2, 1 plus 0.12. That would be the 12% right here. And it's 1 year. So there'd be a 1 up there. And when you do that, 200. So when I do 1.12 to the first power times 200, you end up getting an amount of 224. And lo and behold, the extra money, which was the $24, if you do $24 divided by the original amount, 200, you will get back at that 0.12, because really it's 12% more. But if you did where it's a monthly percentage rate and you did 1% every month, so I'm doing the same $200, I'm doing the same 12%, so it's 1 plus, but in this case, instead of being 12%, we're going to do it 1%, because it's 12 divided by the 12 months. So every month is 1%. And in this case, well, because this is the per month rate, I'm going to do 1 year is actually 12 months. So it's going to be multiplied 12 times because there's 12 months in a year. So essentially, instead of doing 12% for the year, I'm doing 1% every month, compounded every month. And when you do that, you end up getting 1.01 to the 12th power times 200. And you end up actually getting not the same amount. You end up getting, and when I did this on my calculator, 225 point about 37 cents. Okay. Well, what you're going to notice is if I take that, so first of all, the extra money would have been $25.37 divided by the original, you end up getting $25.37 divided by 200. You end up getting actually 0.12, it's almost 7. So instead of being a 12% annual percentage rate, even though it seems like it would be the same, it ends up being a little bit more than 12%. So even if you have 1% every month, it's going to be more than just having 12% at the end of the year. So hopefully you learned that compounding more or multiplying it more times is going to get you more money. Right? So that's what you learned last time. Now, a couple of vocabulary that you really have to know before going into this lesson. First of all, you're going to learn that a lot of things in real life have an annual percentage rate. So they still base it on the year. But instead of compounding it a year, different banks, different loans, different interest rates are compounded differently. So you already know compounded monthly means every month, which would mean that's 12 times a year. Compounded semi-annually. Semi-annually means that this basically is being compounded only twice a year. So semi-annually means twice a year. So every 6 months. Compounded quarterly means every 4 months. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not what that means. That means every 3 months. Because if you compound it quarterly, that's 4 times a year. So 12 divided by 4 would mean that you're compounding it every 3 months. So quarterly means you're doing it 4 times a year. And then sometimes there are weird situations where they might say, we're going to compound it every 2 months. And then you have to kind of go with what they're saying. But generally, these words right here, annually, monthly, semi-annually, or quarterly, are generally probably the most popular ones that you'll see in real everyday life. So how do we use them? This is where it gets a little complicated. And again, please, I'm talking quick, but go back, pause the video, take in what I'm saying, write this down, and it's going to really help you in the next class. Okay, so Hold on one second. So we learned in the last class that anytime you have kind of interest problems, whether it's good interest, meaning money that you receive from the bank, or bad interest, money you have to pay back on a loan, this is the general formula, which tells you that interest grows or decays exponentially. Okay? Now, we also talked about that we kind of made this formula, and remember, A is the original amount, B is the growth factor. Okay? And then X now is going to be how many times you're multiplying it. Because if I have a growth factor of 7%, I might be multiplying that 7% 12 times a year. I might only be multiplying it once a year. So instead of X being the amount of years, I'm kind of making it the number of times it was compounded. Now, there's a couple things that you're going to want to change with your formula. Now, we're always going to start off with the original amount. But what we're going to ask you to do is, in the last class, we said when something has a 12% interest, that means it's 12% over the 100%. So a lot of you just made this number 1.12. We're going to ask you for these problems to separate it into, instead of 1.12, we're going to separate it into 1 plus 0.12. And we're going to show you why that is later. But it's going to be very helpful for you. Now, what you're going to want to do is, in these problems, what you're going to notice is that they're going to talk about the APR. They're going to talk about the annual percentage rate, but then they're going to talk about a compounding a different amount than the year. And as we talked about, that means that if you have 12% a year, but you're doing it by month, you're not doing 12% every month. That's just the yearly percentage rate. So we would have to take this percentage and divide it by 12 because there's 12 months. Well, if I tell you that we have a 12% annual percentage rate, but we're doing it semi-annually, well, that means that the 12% is going to be divided by 2 because you're breaking that 12% into 2 times, 6% and 6%. Okay? Now, this amount is also a little complicated. And by the way, if you didn't understand that part, don't go back. I'm going to explain this a little bit with an example. Sometimes an example helps in understanding how you make the equation. This amount right here is pretty much going to be the time. I want you to think of this as how many times things get compounded. So, for example, let's say we give you an annual percentage rate, but it's compounded monthly. And let's say I want to know how much money's left at the end of 3 years. Well, you're not putting a 3 in there because it's going to be compounded a lot more. You're going to be multiplying this rate way more than 3 times. So in this time, we're going to multiply the 3 years times how many months are in a year? 12. So you're going to actually do, so basically, if you're compounding it monthly, up here is pretty much going to be how many months we're dealing with. So 3 years times 12 months in a year means you're going to be actually working with 36 months. So the exponent is going to be 36. And again, like I said, hold off on being like, I don't understand until we get to this next example, okay? And please remember, at any of these problems, if we just talk about a 12% annual return on interest or a 5% monthly, you don't have to worry about all these things because we're just using one time frame. If I say you invest $100 and it's 12% annually, well, that would just be 100 times it's 1 plus 0.12. And this would just be how many years? It's 12% annually. If I tell you there's 5 years, that would just be a 5 in there. You don't need to make that complicated. If I give you $100 and I say that it's 5% monthly, I'm not talking about 2 different time frames. So $100 times 1 plus 0.05, because it's 5% monthly, and then you're just going to put in here, how many months are we talking about? The only time you have to worry about it getting complicated is when you hear 2 different time frames. So, for example, this would be an example. Let's say I invest $100 and I tell you that there's a 6% APR. That's annual percentage rate. So we're talking about yearly. 6% annual yearly return rate. But we're telling you that it's now compounded monthly, okay? So in your head, you got to be thinking, wow, they're giving me an annual and now they're talking about monthly. All right, well, now I got to change my equation a little bit. So now, first of all, the first thing you're going to change, first of all, the starting amount doesn't change. The OG, as Mr. Angoran says, is $100. We're starting with $100. Now, what's the growth rate? So we want you to separate, it's 100%, and it's going to be 6% extra a year. But that's the annual percentage rate. And we're telling you that we're not doing this every year. We're actually going to be multiplying it every month. So the first thing you have to do is you have to divide the percentage rate by the time frame and how many months you're doing. And we're doing it by 12. So we're taking that 6%, but we're breaking it into groups of 12 because you're doing it every month. So that's the first thing you have to do. Now, up here, since we're talking about we're doing this compounding monthly, basically up in this amount is pretty much going to be the how many times are we going to end up multiplying by this 106%, the 100% plus the 6%? How many times are we going to be doing that? Well, let's think about this. If I tell you that there are 4 years, okay, well, we're doing it every month. There's 12 months in a year times the 4 years. So up here is going to be 12 times 4 or 48. Okay? Now, reminder, make sure that you follow the order of operations in solving this problem. The first thing is you got to do the parentheses. So first of all, we're going to do 1 plus 0.06 divided by 12. Your calculator will know to divide by 12 before adding the 1. But if you really are concerned, you could always do 1.06 divided by 12 and then add 1 to it. And that gets you your growth rate. That's what you're going to be multiplying by. Then do it to the 48th power and then do it times 100. Okay? So that is how you're going to get your answer. And if I do that on my calculator, and you also might want to try this on your calculator just to double check you're getting the right answer and you're putting in everything in the exact correct way. So I'm doing 0.06 divided by 12, which is 6% annually, divided by 12 since we're doing it monthly. Then I'm adding 1, and you get 1.005 to the 48th power, and then I'm multiplying that times 100. Now, that gets me an answer of $127 and about, I'm rounding, 5 cents. All right, so let's talk about what that really means, okay? So is that really, and hopefully by now in the first example, you know that that's actually going to be way more than a 6% APR, okay? So to find out what really that percentage rate is, we're going to do a couple of things, but just know that that 127.05 is going to signify a much higher rate than, well, not a much higher rate, but it's going to be a higher rate than 6%. So first of all, I'm going to find out, well, how much money did I just gain? Okay, I just gained 100 minus 127.05. I just gained $27.05 in interest. That's how much I gained in that 4 years. Not a lot of money, okay, but I got $27.05. I only put in $100. Now, if I want to know how much that really is, I'm going to divide it by what was the this was the percentage. What was the total amount of money I invested in there? And it was $100. So 27.05 divided by 100, okay, that will get you 0.2705, okay, which is about 27. It's about 27%. Now remember, this was 4 years. So that was how much it was after the 4 years. I just gained 27%. But if I want to know per year, I'm going to divide it by 4 years. And that gets me about 6.7. It's about 6.8%. So the real interest rate that you grew on your account was 6.8%, even though they advertised it as a 6% APR. Because you compounded every month, it was actually 6.8. Remember, the way I got 6.8 was I took the amount of interest I actually earned, and I divided it by the original amount. And that got me my own percent. But remember, you also have to account for the time. And then I divided it by 4 because that was after 4 years. And I wanted to know how much percent was I getting every year. All right? Let's have you try one. All right. So for some reason or another, I almost missed my last class. And because I was doing this video and then I forgot, I literally was like not at the beginning of my last class. So I think this is where we ended off on this video. So go ahead and try this. Like, literally try to get an answer for if something is 6% APR and is compounded semi-annually. Don't worry if you're wrong. Just try it. We're going to go over it. How much money would there be in 6 years? Okay, and this would either be, hopefully this is good. This is like a money that you get, not money you have to pay. It's not a loan. This would be a bank account. Okay, so hopefully you got a chance to do it. Okay, and whenever you have these problems, try your best at them. Don't just put in an answer and go, because we want to see you trying to get them right. So the next one will actually count. So first of all, semi-annually means twice a year. That's the first thing we talked about before. Okay, so that means you're going to have to take, so instead of 1 plus 0.06, okay, that's the annual percentage rate. We're going to have to divide the annual percentage rate by 2 because you're breaking it into 2 parts. So this would be what would be inside the parentheses. Oh, you know what's funny? I actually can't include this as a problem to do because I never told you how much money we were starting with. So for this problem, hopefully what I just did makes sense. Let's say we're starting with $1,200. Okay. Now, after 6 years, we have to figure out how many times that could be compounded. So remember, we're compounding semi-annually, so twice a year for 6 years, which means that the number up here is going to be 6 times 2 or 12. So in order to get out how much money I make, it would be f of x equals, you would do this part first. 0.06 divided by 2 is 0.03. So you would have 1.03 to the 12th power. And you would multiply that times 1,200. And just if you're doing this at home, well, hopefully you are doing this at home. I don't know else what you'd be doing this. You would end up with, so just double check your answer, you would end up with 17,913. So if I want to round that, it would be $1,710.91. Okay. Now, if I ask you, what really was the APR we were working with? Okay. So I want to remind you that you do, so I'm going to subtract 1,710. I'm going to subtract it from 1,200. And when I do that, you end up getting $510.91. Okay, that's the money. That's the extra money you earned. Okay, so I'm going to erase everything else for a second. Okay, and the next couple will just give you a chance to practice this. Okay, but hopefully that made sense. Maybe not. Maybe it did. But this is, if anything, this is going to help you for the next class. Okay, so if I wanted to know my actual relative, like what was the actual percentage rate that actually we were using? Because I'm telling you, even though the bank said it was 6% APR, it really wasn't. We were making more than 6% because we're compounding it more than once a year. So I take the $510.91 and I'm going to divide it by what we started with and find out what percent of the original was my interest. And when I do that, 510.91 divided by 1200, you end up with 0.4257. Okay. Now, first thing I'm going to do is get that to be a percent. So I'm going to keep that in my calculator. I'm not going to round that. I'm going to divide by 100. So I just literally hit divided by 100, and that leaves me with a really long decimal, 0.004. Well, look at me. I totally did that the wrong way. When you go from a decimal to a percent, you don't divide by 100, you multiply by 100. How silly of me. So when I multiply by 100, you get, and again, I'm not rounding yet. You don't want to round to the very end. You end up with 0.42. I'm sorry, geez. You end up with 42.5758, and then there's a bunch of threes that repeat. So this is the percentage, but this percentage was over 6 years. So without rounding anything, I'm leaving this entire number in my calculator. I'm dividing by 6 because this will tell me how much it was per year. And when I do that, you end up getting 7.095, which now, finally, that's my final answer, I can round. And I can say this is about 7.1%. So look at that. Even though the company advertised for 6%, you were actually making 7.1% per year because you were compounding it more than once a year. All right, now let's give you some problems to try on your own. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and let you guys just do the first problem, see if you can get an answer. Okay, so this one, If it's compounded monthly, I'm going to do, and then 10% APR compounded for 2 years. And let's say you start with $1,000. Go ahead and tell me what you think you would end up making at the end of the 2 years. Okay. Hopefully you did this. So it's 1 plus 0.10, but we have to divide the 0.10 because it's monthly, breaking it into 12 parts. And then, since we're doing it monthly, how many times will I actually be multiplying it in 2 years? Well, 2 times 12, which I'm just going to put a 24 up here. Okay? And when you solve that out, you get that it would be and notice I'm not, if you're getting a different answer than me, it means that you're rounding and you're not leaving it in your calculator. So my final answer is 1,220.390. And now, because that's my final answer, I can round. That's how much money I would make after 2 years. Now let's try one more. 8% APR compounded semi-annually for 3 years. How much money would you make if you started with $1,000? Hopefully, in case you got it wrong, this is what you should have done. 1,000, oh, I don't know why I put a f of x equals, or the money you're going to make equals 1,000, the starting amount, times 1 plus, so it's 8% APR, but we're dividing that by 2 because it's semi-annually. And in 3 years, you're going to put a 6 up here, which would be the 3 years times twice a year because it's semi-annually. Okay? And if you do all of this, you would end up with 0.08 divided by 2, you're really dealing with 0.04. So it's 1.04 to the 6th power times 1,000. And you end up with, you just made $1,265 and about 32 cents. You could round it at the end because it's your final answer. And that's how we do these kind of problems. Hopefully that helps. Please watch the video as many times as you'd like. We don't expect you to be experts at this point, but we're going to kind of cover this in class as well.